Baby found a German Shepherd stuck in a playground tunnel. What happened next left. Everyone in tears. The scream that pierced through Riverside Community Park that Saturday morning wasn't human. What 5-year-old Tommy Chen discovered would change not just his life, but reveal a connection so profound that everyone who witnessed it still can't speak about it without tears. Don't forget to like, share, subscribe, and let us know in the comments where you're watching from. Tommy's small hand slipped from his mother's grasp at exactly 7:43 a.m. Sarah Chen didn't notice immediately. She was stirring sugar into her coffee, discussing weekend plans with her husband David at the park cafe's outdoor table. The morning sun cast long shadows across the playground equipment. Birds chirped. Everything seemed perfectly normal, except Tommy hadn't spoken a real sentence in 3 months, not since his grandmother's funeral. Just give him time, the therapist had said. Selective mutism after trauma is more common than you think. But time hadn't helped. Tommy moved through life like a ghost child, responding with nods, shakes of his head, sometimes a whispered yes or no. His parents' hearts broke a little more each silent day. The boy wandered past the swings, their chains creaking in the gentle breeze, past the slide where other children would soon play. His untied shoelace dragged through the dewy grass. He was drawn to something, though he couldn't have explained what. The playground tunnel sat at the far edge of the park, one of those large concrete pipes painted bright blue on the outside, meant for children to crawl through. But the sound coming from inside wasn't childlike at all. It was a low, desperate whimper. Tommy dropped to his knees at the tunnel's entrance. The darkness inside seemed to breathe. He leaned forward, squinting. 2 amber eyes stared back at him from deep within the tunnel. Not human eyes, but filled with something Tommy recognized immediately. Fear, pain, and underneath it all, hope. The German Shepherd was massive, even in the confined space. Its body was wedged sideways about halfway through the tunnel, fur matted with mud and something darker. Blood, Tommy realized, though the word didn't scare him. The dog's breathing came in short, labored pants. One of its front paws was bent at an angle that looked wrong. Tommy did something then that would have terrified his parents if they'd seen it. He crawled into the tunnel. The dog's whimper turned into a low growl, not aggressive, more like a warning. Stay back, I'm dangerous. But Tommy kept crawling forward, his small body easily fitting where the large dog could not. He reached out one tiny hand, palm up, fingers spread. It's okay, Tommy whispered, the first real words he'd spoken to anyone in months. I'm here to help. The growl stopped. The dog's eyes fixed on Tommy's face with an intensity that would have frightened an adult. But Tommy just sat there, cross-legged in the dirty tunnel, his hand still extended. Waiting, the dog's nose touched his fingers. Warm breath. Then, impossibly gently for such a large animal, a pink tongue licked Tommy's palm. Tommy! David's voice exploded across the playground. Tommy! Where are you? The boy turned his head toward the tunnel entrance. Daddy! His voice rang clear and strong. Daddy! Someone needs help! Sarah dropped her coffee cup. It shattered on the concrete, brown liquid spreading like a storm cloud. Those were more words than Tommy had strung together since February. She ran toward the sound of his voice, David right behind her. They found him in the tunnel with the dog. David's first instinct was to grab his son, pull him to safety. But something in Tommy's eyes stopped him. He's stuck, Daddy. And he's hurt, real bad. Sarah's hand flew to her mouth. The German Shepherd was enormous, taking up most of the tunnel's width. Its breathing was labored, ribs showing through patchy fur. One eye was swollen shut. Dried blood crusted around what looked like deep scratches along its side. Tommy, come out of there slowly, David said, his voice forcibly calm. That dog could be dangerous. No. Tommy's small hand rested on the dog's massive head. He's not dangerous. He's scared. The dog's good eye moved from Tommy to the adults at the tunnel entrance. The look in that eye was almost human, pleading, desperate, but also resigned, like it had given up hope until this small boy crawled into its darkness. Call 911, Sarah whispered to David. We need help. While David made the call, Sarah watched her son with this strange dog. Tommy was talking to it, his voice soft and continuous, more words than she'd heard from him in months. The dog's breathing seemed to calm at the sound. "What's your name?" Tommy asked the dog. "You have a collar." "Let me see." His small fingers found the worn leather collar hidden beneath matted fur. A metal tag dangled from it, scratched and tarnished. Tommy squinted at it in the dim light. "Bear," he read out loud. "Your name is Bear." The dog's tail, what little of it could move in the confined space, thumped once against the tunnel wall. "There's more writing," Tommy continued, tracing the letters with his finger. "Handler. Sergeant James Mitchell." Sarah's breath caught. A military dog? That explained the collar, the tag. But what was a military service dog doing stuck in a playground tunnel, clearly abandoned and injured? The fire department arrived 12 minutes later. 3 trucks, lights flashing, drawing a crowd of early morning joggers and dog walkers. Fire Chief Rodriguez assessed the situation quickly. "We'll need to be careful," he told his team. "Dog this size, injured and scared, could turn aggressive fast." They tried approaching with a catch-pole. Bear's growl rumbled through the tunnel like thunder. His lips pulled back, revealing teeth that made everyone step back, except Tommy. "You're scaring him," the boy said simply. "Let me stay with him." "Absolutely not," Rodriguez said. "Son, we need you to come out so we can help the dog." Tommy shook his head. "He won't let you." "Not without me." Sarah knelt at the tunnel entrance. "Tommy, sweetheart, please come out." The firefighters know what they're doing, but Tommy's jaw set in a way she recognized, the same stubborn expression his grandmother used to have. "He chose me, Mama. He needs me to stay." The crowd grew larger. Someone started recording with their phone. An elderly man in a veteran's cap pushed forward. "Let me see that tag," he said, authority in his voice. Rodriguez showed him the information Tommy had read. The man's face went pale. "James Mitchell," he whispered. "Sergeant James Mitchell. I knew him. Served together at the VA hospital." His voice cracked. "Jimmy died 6 months ago." The crowd fell silent. Even the morning birds seemed to stop singing. 6 months? Sarah asked. "But then, where has Bear been all this time?" The veteran, who introduced himself as Carl, shook his head. "Jimmy lived alone after his wife died. No kids, just him and Bear. That dog was everything to him. Trained service animal, helped with his PTSD. Carl's eyes glistened. "When Jimmy died, neighbor said Bear disappeared. Everyone assumed he'd run off to die somewhere. Dogs do that sometimes, when they lose their person." Tommy's voice came from the tunnel, clear and certain. He wasn't running away to die. He was looking for someone. "Looking for who, buddy?" David asked. Tommy's answer made everyone's skin prickle with goosebumps. "For someone who needed him, like I need him, and he needs me." Rodriguez tried again with his team. They attempted to widen the tunnel opening, but Bear panicked at the sound of tools. His struggling only wedged him tighter. One of the firefighters suggested sedation, but the veterinarian they had called warned against it. "In his condition, sedation could be fatal, Doctor," Jennifer Park said, examining Bear as best she could from the tunnel entrance. "He's severely dehydrated, malnourished. That injured paw is infected. And listen to his breathing, possible pneumonia." "So what do we do?" Rodriguez asked. Dr. Park looked at Tommy, still sitting calmly with the dog. "Sometimes the best medicine isn't medical. That boy is keeping the dog calm. Without him, Bear might hurt himself worse trying to escape." The morning stretched into afternoon. The crowd grew to nearly 100 people. Someone brought Tommy juice boxes and sandwiches, which he shared with Bear, hand-feeding the dog small pieces. Local news showed up. The story spread on social media. A mute boy and a military dog, both broken, finding each other. "He's getting weaker," Tommy announced around 2 p.m. His voice carried a mature worry that seemed wrong coming from a 5-year-old. "His breathing is different." Dr. Park checked again. Tommy was right. Bear's condition was deteriorating. "We need to get him out now," she said, "or we'll lose him." Tommy looked at Bear, their eyes meeting in the darkness of the tunnel. Then the boy did something that made everyone gasp. He wrapped his small arms around the dog's neck and whispered something no one else could hear. Bear's tail thumped weakly. "Okay," Tommy said, pulling back. "He's ready now, but I stay with him." What followed was 3 hours of careful work. The fire department cut away part of the tunnel, not with loud saws, but with hand tools, Tommy talking to Bear the entire time. The dog never growled again. Even when they had to manipulate his injured paw to free him, Bear just whimpered softly, his eyes never leaving Tommy's face. When they finally pulled Bear free, the crowd erupted in cheers. But the celebration was short-lived. In the full sunlight, Bear's condition was even more shocking. Ribs protruding, fur missing in patches. That infected paw swollen to twice its normal size. Old scars and new wounds covering his body. "He needs immediate surgery," Dr. Park said. The infection could spread to his bloodstream. Sarah and David exchanged looks. They'd seen the estimate, Doctor. Park had quietly shown them. $8,000 minimum, money they didn't have. "We'll take him to the shelter," Animal Control Officer Bryant said gently. "They'll do what they can." Everyone knew what that meant. The shelter, overwhelmed and underfunded, would likely euthanize Bear. It was the humane thing, Bryant would say. An old, sick military dog with no owner. Tommy's scream was primal. It came from somewhere deep inside, 3 months of silence breaking like a dam. "No! You can't take him. He came for me. He came all this way for me." The boy threw himself over Bear's body, sobbing with an intensity that brought tears to watching eyes. Bear, despite his weakness, lifted his head and licked Tommy's face. "Please," Tommy sobbed, looking at his parents. "Please don't let them take him. He's not just a dog. He's special. Grandma sent him." Sarah's heart shattered. Tommy's grandmother had been his best friend, his safe person. Her death had stolen his voice. And now, somehow, this dog had given it back. "How much?" David asked Dr. Park quietly. "For everything. Surgery, medication, recovery." "Possibly 12,000, she admitted. "Maybe more if there are complications." David closed his eyes. They had 3,000 in savings. That was it. The crowd had gone quiet, everyone watching this small family face an impossible choice. Then Carl, the veteran, stepped forward. "I'll put in 500, he said gruffly. Jimmy would want his dog saved. A woman with a jogging stroller raised her hand. 200 from me. 300, called out a teenager with a skateboard. One by one, strangers began pledging money. Someone started a GoFundMe on their phone. Within an hour, they had raised $6,000. But it wasn't enough. That's when a black sedan pulled up to the park. A woman in an expensive suit stepped out, her face hidden behind large sunglasses. She walked directly to where Tommy sat with Bear, knelt down, and handed David a check. "For the full amount," she said quietly. "Whatever it costs." "Who are you?" Sarah asked. The woman removed her sunglasses, revealing eyes red from crying. Someone who knew what it felt like to lose everything. "Until a dog saved me." She touched Bear's head gently. "Not this dog, but one just like him, trained by the same program. These dogs, they don't just find people who need them. They find people who are meant to save each other." She stood to leave, then turned back. "The boy is right. This isn't coincidence. Dogs like Bear, they know things we don't understand. Trust him, trust them both." The surgery took 6 hours. Tommy refused to leave the veterinary hospital, sleeping on the waiting room floor with his head on his mother's lap. David paced. Sarah prayed to a God she wasn't sure she believed in anymore. At 11:47 p.m., Dr. Park emerged, exhausted but smiling. He made it. Touch and go for a while, but he's a fighter. She looked at Tommy, who had jumped to his feet. He kept trying to get up, even under anesthesia, like he was trying to get to someone. "To me," Tommy said with complete certainty. "Can I see him? He's still unconscious. Please." Something in the boy's voice made Dr. Park number. She led them to recovery, where Bear lay on a heated blanket, IV tubes running into his leg, monitors beeping steadily. Tommy approached slowly, placing his small hand on Bear's side. "I'm here," he whispered. "You're safe now?" "We're safe." Bear's eyes fluttered open, just for a moment. His tail moved, barely a twitch, but his eyes found Tommy's face before closing again. "He knows you're here, Doctor," Park said, amazed. His heart rate just stabilized. "It's been erratic all through surgery." They stayed all night. Tommy curled up in a chair they pulled next to Bear's recovery kennel, his hand reaching through the bars to touch the dog's fur. Sarah and David took turns staying awake, watching their son watch this dog with a devotion they didn't fully understand. The next morning brought sunlight and hope. Bear was awake, alert, his eyes tracking Tommy's every movement. When Tommy offered him water from his hand, Bear drank carefully, his tongue gentle against the boy's palm. "He's going to need weeks of recovery, Doctor," Park explained. "Antibiotics for the infection, physical therapy for that paw. He may always have a limp." "We'll take care of him," Tommy said before his parents could speak. "Won't we?" David and Sarah looked at each other. They lived in a small house with a tiny yard. They both worked full-time. They knew nothing about caring for a large, traumatized service dog. "Yes," Sarah heard herself say. "We'll take care of him." But there was more to the story. There had to be. A military service dog doesn't travel 15 miles through dangerous city streets, injured and starving, to randomly end up in a playground tunnel. The veteran, Carl, had confirmed that Mitchell's house was on the other side of the city, across 2 major highways. "How did he even survive the journey?" David asked Doctor. "Park," she shook her head. "Honestly, he shouldn't have. The infection in his paw is at least 2 weeks old. He hasn't eaten properly in longer than that. And those scratches." She paused. They looked defensive, like he was in a fight. "With another animal?" "No, the pattern is wrong. These look almost deliberate." Tommy, who had been quietly stroking Bear's head, spoke up. "Someone hurt him. Someone bad, but Bear got away. He had to find me before the bad person found him again." Sarah knelt beside her son. "Tommy, honey, why do you think Bear was looking for you specifically?" Tommy looked at her with those serious, too-old eyes. "Because Grandma told him to." "Sweetheart, Grandma passed away before—" "In my dreams," Tommy interrupted. "Grandma's been in my dreams. With a soldier. They're friends in heaven. The soldier is sad because he had to leave Bear, and Grandma is sad because she had to leave me. So they made a plan." David started to say something about how dreams aren't real, but Sarah stopped him with a hand on his arm. Whatever Tommy believed, it had brought him back to them. His voice, his spark, his ability to connect, Bear had returned it all. The story spread beyond their small town. The local news segment got picked up nationally. "Mute Boy Saves Military Dog," the headlines read. But that wasn't the real story. The real story was just beginning to unfold. 3 days into Bear's recovery, an elderly woman appeared at the veterinary hospital. She walked with a cane, her back bent with age, but her eyes were sharp and bright. She asked to see Bear and the boy who saved him. "I'm Martha Mitchell," she said when Doctor Park brought her to the recovery room. "James was my son." Tommy looked up from where he sat, reading a picture book to Bear. The dog's ears perked up at the woman's voice, his tail wagging weakly. Martha's eyes filled with tears. "Oh, Bear, my sweet boy. I thought I'd lost you too." She sat heavily in a chair, her weathered hands shaking. Sarah offered her water, which she accepted gratefully. "Tell us about your son," Sarah said gently. Martha smiled through her tears. "Jimmy was a good man. The war broke something in him, but Bear helped put it back together. That dog was trained special, you know, not just for PTSD, for protection." "Protection from what?" David asked. Martha's expression darkened. "From himself, mostly. The nightmares, the flashbacks. But also—" She hesitated. "Jimmy made enemies when he came home. He testified against some fellow soldiers who were selling drugs they'd stolen from military medical supplies. They went to prison. Jimmy went into hiding, sort of. Moved here, kept to himself. Just him and Bear. And these soldiers," David said slowly, "are they still in prison?" Martha shook her head. "One got out 4 months ago, Tyler Brooks. He came looking for Jimmy, but Jimmy was already gone, heart attack in his sleep. Bear was lying right beside him when the neighbor found them 3 days later. Dog wouldn't leave his body. They had to physically carry Bear out. Then Bear disappeared," Sarah said. "Yes, I thought maybe he'd gone off to grieve. Dogs do that. But then strange things started happening at Jimmy's house. Break-ins, someone searching for something. The police said probably just vandals, but you think it was Tyler Brooks," David finished. Martha nodded. "Jimmy had evidence. More than what he testified about. He kept records, photos, said it was his insurance policy. I don't know where he hid it, but Bear might. Tommy, who had been listening quietly, spoke up. Bear knows. He tried to protect it, but the bad man heard him. So Bear ran. But not just anywhere. He ran to find someone who could help. How could Bear possibly know where to find you? Martha asked. Tommy showed her the picture book he'd been reading to Bear. It was old, worn, the pages yellowed. Sarah recognized it immediately. It had been Tommy's grandmother's, one she used to read to him every night. This was Grandma's, Tommy explained. She gave it to me before she went to heaven. Look. He opened to the inside cover. Written in faded ink was a message. To my darling Rose, love, always James. 1968. Martha gasped. That's Jimmy's handwriting. From Vietnam. He and Rose were pen pals during the war. The nurses wrote to soldiers to keep their spirits up. Rose was Jimmy's nurse when he was wounded. Sarah's hand flew to her mouth. Rose was my mother-in-law, Tommy's grandmother. The room fell silent except for the steady beep of Bear's monitors. The connection was impossible, yet undeniable. James Mitchell and Rose Chen had known each other over 50 years ago, and somehow their paths had crossed again through a dog and a boy who needed each other. But how would Bear know to find Tommy? David asked, his logical mind struggling with the coincidence. Martha pulled out her phone, scrolling through old photos. Jimmy kept pictures, said they helped with his memory exercises. She found what she was looking for and showed them the screen. It was a photo of James, much older, sitting on a park bench. Beside him sat an elderly Asian woman, Rose, Tommy's grandmother. When was this taken? Sarah asked, her voice barely a whisper. January, Martha said, about a month before Jimmy died. I don't know how they found each other after all these years, but they met every Tuesday at Riverside Park. Jimmy would bring Bear. They'd sit and talk for hours. Riverside Park, where Tommy had found Bear. Bear knew Grandma, Tommy said, his voice matter of fact. That's why he came to our park. He could smell her, even though she's gone, and he could smell me, because I smell like her. It sounded like a child's fantasy, but Doctor, Park spoke up, Oak. Actually, that's scientifically possible. Dogs can detect family scent markers, and a trained service dog like Bear would have an even more developed ability to track and recognize scents. He was looking for Rose, Martha said softly, and found her grandson instead. Bear lifted his head, looking at each person in turn, his eyes holding that uncanny intelligence that made him seem almost human. His gaze settled on Tommy, and his tail thumped against the kennel floor. We need to find what your son hid, David said to Martha. If Tyler Brooks is still looking for it, he might come after Bear. Or after whoever has Bear, Sarah added, pulling Tommy closer. Martha stood with difficulty. Jimmy's house is being sold. The estate lawyer has the keys. I could arrange for you to look, but I don't know where Jimmy would have hidden anything. Bear knows, Tommy said confidently. He'll show us. When he's better. But they wouldn't have time to wait for Bear's full recovery. That night, as the Chen family finally went home for proper sleep, leaving Bear and Doctor, Park's capable hands, they didn't notice the figure watching from the parking lot. They didn't see him follow them home. They didn't know that Tyler Brooks had already found them. The first sign of trouble came 3 days later. Bear had been moved to a recovery foster room at the veterinary hospital, a comfortable space where Tommy could visit for longer periods. The boy spent every moment after school with the dog, reading to him, hand-feeding him special recovery food, simply sitting in quiet companionship. Bear's recovery was remarkable. The infection was responding to antibiotics. His weight was slowly increasing. The swelling in his paw had gone down significantly. But it was the change in his eyes that was most striking. The hollow, desperate look had been replaced by something like peace. He knows he's safe, Doctor, Park told Sarah. That's half the battle with traumatized animals. But that evening, as they prepared to leave, Bear suddenly became agitated. He struggled to stand despite his injured paw, a low growl building in his throat. His eyes were fixed on the window that looked out onto the parking lot. "What's wrong, Bear?" Tommy asked, but he already seemed to know. His small body tensed. "Mom, someone bad is here." Sarah looked out the window, but saw only the usual collection of cars. "I don't see anyone, sweetie." Bear's growl grew louder. Dr. Park, who had come to check on the commotion, frowned. I've never seen him react like this. Not even when strangers come in. David was already on his phone, calling hospital security. His instincts, honed by years of protecting his family, were on high alert. We're leaving through the back exit, he decided. They gathered their things quickly. Bear tried to follow, limping heavily on his injured paw. No, Bear, you have to stay, Tommy said, hugging the dog's neck. You're not strong enough yet. Bear whined, his eyes moving from Tommy to the window and back. The message was clear: danger, protect, stay together. Security escorted them to their car, but found no one suspicious in the parking lot. Still, David took a circuitous route home, checking his mirrors constantly. Sarah held Tommy's hand in the back seat, both of them silent. They were 3 blocks from home when David spotted it, a dark pickup truck maintaining perfect following distance. When he turned, it turned. When he slowed, it slowed. Call 911, he told Sarah quietly. But before she could dial, the truck accelerated, pulling alongside them at a red light. The window rolled down. A man's face appeared, gaunt, scarred, with eyes that held a particular kind of coldness that came from years of buried rage. He didn't say anything. He just stared at Tommy, then smiled. The light turned green, and the truck peeled away, disappearing into traffic. That was him, Tommy whispered. The bad man who hurt Bear. The police took their report seriously, especially after Martha confirmed that the description matched Tyler Brooks. Extra patrols were assigned to their neighborhood. The veterinary hospital hired additional security, but everyone knew these were temporary measures. He wants what Jimmy hid, Detective Morrison explained, and he thinks either Bear knows where it is or you do. We don't know anything, Sarah insisted. But Bear does, Tommy said quietly, and when he's better, he'll show us. Then the bad man will go away. The detective looked skeptical, but David was learning to trust his son's strange insights about the dog. How long until Bear can leave the hospital? Another week, maybe 2, Doctor, Park said when they asked. His paw needs more healing before he can walk any real distance. But Tyler Brooks wasn't going to wait that long. The break-in attempt came at 3 a.m., 4 nights after the parking lot encounter. It might have succeeded, except for one thing. Tommy had insisted on sleeping downstairs, closer to the door. In case Bear comes, he'd said, which made no sense since Bear was secure at the veterinary hospital. But Tommy's presence in the living room meant he heard the soft scratching at the back door lock. He didn't scream or run to his parents. Instead, he did something that would seem impossible if it hadn't been caught on the nanny cam Sarah had installed just days before. He stood up, walked to the front door, and opened it. There, standing on the porch, was Bear. The dog was panting heavily, his injured paw bleeding fresh through his bandages. He'd somehow escaped from the veterinary hospital, traveled 3 miles through the night, and arrived at exactly the moment he was needed. Bear pushed past Tommy into the house, his hackles raised, a savage growl erupting from his throat just as the back door swung open. Tyler Brooks stepped inside, crowbar in hand, and found himself face to face with 80 pounds of protective fury. What happened next was chaos. Bear launched himself at the intruder despite his injuries. Tyler swung the crowbar. Tommy screamed. David came thundering down the stairs with a baseball bat. Sarah called 911, but it was Tommy's voice that cut through everything, high and clear and commanding. Bear, hold! The dog froze mid-lunge, teeth inches from Tyler's throat. The man was on his back, Bear's weight pinning him down, those powerful jaws ready to strike, but held back by a 5-year-old's command. Don't move, Tommy told Tyler, his voice eerily calm. Bear won't hurt you if you don't move. Tyler's eyes darted between the boy and the dog. Call him off! No, Tommy said simply, not until you tell the truth. Tommy, David said, bat still raised. Let the police handle this. But Tommy shook his head. Bear needs to hear it. He needs to know why his person died. Tyler's face contorted. I didn't kill Jimmy. He was already dead when I got there. But you hurt Bear, Tommy said. It wasn't a question. Tyler's silence was admission enough. You were looking for something, Tommy continued, his child's voice carrying an authority that seemed to come from somewhere beyond his years. Something, mister, Mitchell hid. Evidence, Tyler spat. Photos, documents, proof of things that could send me back to prison. Jimmy promised he'd destroyed it all, but I knew he lied. He always kept insurance. So you hurt Bear trying to make him show you. Tyler's eyes flickered with something that might have been shame. The dog wouldn't leave the house, kept protecting something in the bedroom. I tried to make him move, but he fought me, so I cut him. Figured pain would make him run. Bear's growl deepened, but he didn't move. But he didn't run because of pain, Tommy said. He ran to find help, to find someone who could stop you. Police sirens wailed in the distance, growing closer. Tyler's face twisted with desperation. "Let me go, kid. I'll disappear. You'll never see me again." Tommy looked at Bear, then at his parents, then back at Tyler. "Bear decides," he said. For a long moment, nobody moved. The sirens grew louder. Tyler's breath came in short gasps. Bear's weight pressed down on him, those teeth still inches from his throat. Then, slowly, Bear stepped back. He limped to Tommy's side and sat, his eyes never leaving Tyler. The message was clear. The threat was neutralized. Justice would come another way. The police arrested Tyler Brooks for breaking and entering, assault on an animal, and violation of parole. He didn't resist. Something in his eyes had broken when Bear chose mercy over vengeance. As the police cars pulled away, Park arrived frantic. "Bear broke through a window," she explained. "Set off alarms, but by the time security got there, he was gone." How did he know? Nobody had an answer that made logical sense, but Tommy supplied one anyway. Grandma told him in a dream. Dr. Park examined Bear right there in the living room, new cuts from the window glass, his paw bleeding again, exhaustion evident in every line of his body. "He needs immediate care," she said, but Bear wouldn't move from Tommy's side. "Can you treat him here?" Sarah asked. Dr. Park looked at the boy and dog, pressed together like two pieces of a puzzle finally connected. "I'll get my supplies," she said. As the sun rose over Riverside, painting the sky in shades of pink and gold, the Chen family sat together in their living room. Bear lay on his side, freshly bandaged, his head in Tommy's lap. The boy's hand rested on the dog's chest, feeling each breath, each heartbeat. "He's ours now, right?" Tommy asked. "Forever?" Sarah and David exchanged glances. They thought of the veterinary bills, the size of their house, the complications of owning a large, traumatized service dog. Then they looked at their son, speaking, smiling, alive, in a way he hadn't been since his grandmother's death. "Forever," David confirmed. But there was still the matter of what James Mitchell had hidden. Tyler was in custody, but the evidence he feared was still out there somewhere, and Bear, once he recovered, would need to show them where. Martha visited the next day, bringing with her a box of James's personal effects. "The estate lawyer released these to me," she explained. "I thought maybe there'd be a clue." They went through the items together: military medals, old photographs, letters from Rose during the war. Each piece told a story of a man who had suffered, survived, and tried to protect others from the darkness he'd seen. "Look at this," Sarah said, holding up a photo. It was recent, showing James and Rose on that same park bench. But in the background, barely visible, was a small figure on the playground. Tommy. "That's from January," Martha confirmed. "The last photo Jimmy took." Tommy studied it carefully. "Bear's in it too," he pointed out. Indeed, the German Shepherd was lying at James's feet, but his head was turned, watching the small boy in the distance. "He was already watching you," Martha said wonderingly. "Even then." Tommy nodded as if this made perfect sense. "He was waiting. Grandma told Mr. Mitchell about me being sad, about not talking, and Mr. Mitchell told Bear to remember me. It sounded fantastical, but the photo seemed to support it. Bear's attention was clearly on Tommy, not on his handler or Rose. James always said Bear understood more than a normal dog, Martha said. Said he could read people's hearts. Over the next week, as Bear recovered, the bond between him and Tommy only grew stronger. The boy spent every possible moment with the dog, and Bear seemed to draw strength from his presence. Dr. Park was amazed at the speed of his recovery. "It's like he has something to live for now," she observed. Finally, 2 weeks after the break-in, Bear was strong enough to walk without significant pain. His limp might be permanent, but he could move with purpose again. "I think he's ready," Tommy announced one morning. "Ready for what?" Sarah asked. to show us Mr. Mitchell's secret. They arranged to visit James's house that afternoon. Martha met them there with the keys, along with Detective Morrison, who wanted to secure any evidence properly. The house was small and tidy, though dust had gathered in the month since James's death. Bear entered first, his nose immediately going to work. He moved through each room methodically, as if reacquainting himself with a sacred space. In the bedroom, he went straight to a spot near the closet and began pawing at the floorboards. "There's nothing special about that section," Detective Morrison said, kneeling to examine it. "The boards look solid." But Bear insisted, whining and scratching more urgently. Tommy sat down beside him. "Show us, Bear." "It's okay. The bad man can't hurt anyone anymore." Bear looked at the boy, then did something remarkable. He walked to the bed, gripped the corner of the frame with his teeth, and pulled. The heavy wooden bed shifted slightly. "He wants us to move it," David said. Together, they slid the bed aside. Underneath, the floorboards looked identical to the rest of the room. But Bear went to one specific board and pawed at a tiny, almost invisible notch in the wood. Detective Morrison used a knife to pry at the notch. The board lifted, revealing a hidden compartment. Inside was a waterproof container. The detective opened it carefully, revealing documents, photographs, and USB drives. But on top of everything was an envelope addressed in shaky handwriting. "For whoever Bear trusts." Martha recognized her son's writing immediately. With trembling hands, she opened the letter and read aloud. "If you're reading this, it means I'm gone, and Bear has found someone worthy of his loyalty. The evidence in this box could hurt people who deserve it, but I've held onto it not for revenge, but for protection. I learned long ago that sometimes the best weapon is one you never have to use. But more important than these documents is Bear himself. He's not just a service dog. He's a bridge between hearts. He knows things we humans are too complicated to understand. He knew I was dying before the doctors did. He knows when someone needs him more than they need their next breath. I've watched him watch a little boy at the park, the grandson of my dear friend Rose. The boy doesn't speak much, Rose tells me. Lost in grief, I see myself in him. That silence that comes when the world becomes too heavy for words. If Bear has found his way to this boy, then everything makes sense. My whole life, the war, the pain, the healing, even my death, it all led to Bear finding his next person. His true person. Take care of each other. That's all any of us can do. James Mitchell. The room was silent except for Bear's breathing and Tommy's soft sniffles. The boy buried his face in Bear's fur, and the dog turned to lick his tears. He knew, Martha said wonderingly. Jimmy knew Bear would find Tommy. Detective Morrison secured the evidence, which would eventually lead to several more arrests and the dismantling of a drug ring that had operated for decades. Tyler Brooks, faced with the overwhelming evidence, pled guilty to multiple charges. But for the Chen family, the real treasure wasn't in exposing criminals. It was in the letter's confirmation of what Tommy had somehow known all along. Bear had been meant for them. That evening, they held a small ceremony in their backyard. Martha brought some of James's ashes, which she scattered beneath a newly planted oak tree. Tommy placed his grandmother's picture at the base of the tree, alongside a photo of James in his uniform. So they can be together, he explained. Bear sat between them all, his noble head high, his eyes peaceful. He had completed his mission, brought justice to those who deserved it, brought healing to a grieving child, brought together the loose ends of a story that spanned decades and continents. As the sun set, Tommy asked a question that had been bothering him. Mom, how did Bear know to save us that night? How did he know the bad man was coming? Sarah didn't have a logical answer, but Martha did. James used to say that love transcends death, she said. That the bonds we make, especially with souls like Bear, don't end just because our bodies do. Maybe James is still watching over Bear, and maybe Rose is watching over you, Tommy. Tommy nodded, accepting this explanation with the simple faith of childhood. They're friends in heaven, he said, and they wanted us to be friends on earth. As if in agreement, Bear placed his paw on Tommy's knee, a gesture he'd never made before. The boy laughed, the first real joy-filled laugh his parents had heard in almost a year. But the story wasn't over. The universe, it seemed, had more plans for a boy and his dog. The autumn wind carried the scent of wood smoke and dying leaves through Riverside, marking 6 months since Bear had collapsed in that playground tunnel. Tommy Chen sat on his bedroom floor, surrounded by drawings he'd made of his dog, pages and pages showing Bear in various poses, always with those intelligent amber eyes that seemed to hold the wisdom of ages. "Tommy, breakfast," Sarah called from downstairs. But Tommy didn't move. He was watching Bear, who stood rigid at the window, a low whine building in his throat. The dog's entire body trembled with tension, his nose pressed against the glass. "What do you see, boy?" Tommy whispered, joining him at the window. The street looked normal. Mr. Peterson walking his beagle, the Martinez kids riding their bikes. Nothing unusual. But Bear's whine grew more urgent. Then Tommy saw him. A man standing at the corner, partially hidden behind the Henderson's hedge. Tall, thin, wearing a baseball cap pulled low. He was watching their house. "Mom!" Tommy's voice carried a note of alarm that brought both parents running. David took one look at Bear's defensive posture and immediately understood. "Sarah, call the police. Tell them we have a suspicious person watching our house." But by the time the patrol car arrived, the man was gone. Bear remained agitated for hours, pacing the house, checking every window. That night, he refused to sleep in his usual spot by Tommy's bed, instead positioning himself in the hallway where he could monitor all approaches to the boy's room. "He's protecting me from something," Tommy told his parents over dinner. "Someone new. Not the bad man from before." David and Sarah exchanged worried glances. Tyler Brooks was in prison. The drug ring had been dismantled. Who else could be threatening them? The answer came 3 days later in the form of a registered letter. "It's from a law firm," David said, examining the envelope. "Henderson, Morris, and Associates." Inside was a formal notice. Victor Walker, nephew of James Mitchell, was claiming legal ownership of Bear. Sarah's hands shook as she read. "He says Bear was part of James's estate, that as the sole surviving relative, he has rights to all of James's property, including the dog." "But James's will left everything to the Veterans Charity," David protested. "Apparently Victor is contesting the will," Sarah continued reading. "He claims James wasn't of sound mind when he wrote it, and he has a document, signed by James, promising Bear to him." Tommy, who had been quietly drawing at the kitchen table, suddenly spoke up. "He's lying." Both parents turned to him. Tommy's face was calm, but his eyes held that unsettling wisdom that appeared whenever Bear was threatened. "Mister, Mitchell would never give Bear to someone mean," Tommy continued. "Bear knows. That's why he's been watching for the man. He could smell him getting closer." As if summoned by his name, Bear padded into the kitchen. He went straight to Tommy, pressing his large body against the boy's chair. A silent promise. "I'm not going anywhere." David was already on the phone with Martha Mitchell. Her voice crackled with anger through the speaker. "Victor is a vulture," she said. "He never visited Jimmy when he was alive. Only showed interest after the death, when he thought there might be money. And now he wants Bear?" "He has some kind of document," David explained. Martha was quiet for a moment. "Jimmy did sign something once, years ago, when Victor was getting divorced. He needed to show assets for the settlement. Asked Jimmy to write a letter saying Victor would inherit certain things. But Jimmy told me he destroyed it later, said he didn't trust Victor anymore." "Apparently he didn't destroy it," Sarah said grimly. "We need a lawyer," David decided. "A good one." But good lawyers cost money, and the Chen family had already depleted their savings on Bear's medical bills. The community fundraising had covered the surgery, but the ongoing care, special food, and medications were a constant drain. That night, Tommy had the dream again. He'd been having it for weeks now, but this was the most vivid yet. His grandmother Rose sat on a park bench, sunlight making her silver hair glow. Beside her sat James Mitchell in his army uniform, looking younger, healthier than in any photo Tommy had seen. "He's coming for Bear," Tommy said in the dream. Rose nodded. "We know, sweetheart. But Bear has something Victor wants, something more than just a dog." "What?" Tommy asked. James spoke for the first time in any of Tommy's dreams. His voice was gravelly but kind. "Bear carries memories, son. He knows where I kept the real will, the one that matters." "Where?" Tommy asked urgently. But the dream began to fade. The last thing he heard was his grandmother's voice. "Trust Bear. He'll show you when it's time." Tommy woke to find Bear standing over him, the dog's nose inches from his face. Those amber eyes held an urgency Tommy recognized. "You know where it is, don't you?" Tommy whispered. "The real Will." Bear's tail thumped once against the floor. The next morning brought Victor Walker to their doorstep. He was exactly as Tommy had seen him from the window, tall, thin, with sharp features and cold gray eyes that never seemed to blink enough. He wore an expensive suit and a smile that didn't reach those reptilian eyes. "I'm here for my uncle's dog," he announced when David opened the door. "Bear isn't going anywhere," David said firmly. Victor pulled out a document. "I have legal proof of ownership. You can surrender the dog voluntarily, or I'll get a court order." Bear appeared at David's side, a low growl rumbling from his chest. Victor took a step back. "That animal is dangerous," he said. "It should be put down." "Bear has never hurt anyone," Sarah said, joining them at the door. "He attacked Tyler Brooks." "He protected our family from an intruder," David corrected. Victor's smile widened. "We'll see what a judge thinks. I'll give you 24 hours to say goodbye. Then I'm coming back with the authorities." After he left, Tommy found Bear in the backyard, digging at a specific spot near the oak tree they'd planted for James and Rose. The dog looked up at the boy, dirt on his nose, and whined. "Not there," Tommy asked. Bear moved to another spot and pawed at the ground, then another. He was searching for something, but coming up empty. "It's not here, is it?" Tommy said, understanding dawning. "It's at Mr. Mitchell's house." Bear's entire body went rigid. He looked toward the street, then back at Tommy, his message clear. "We need to go there." But James's house had been sold 2 months ago. New people live there now. They couldn't just show up and start digging in their yard. That evening, while his parents made desperate phone calls to lawyers they couldn't afford, Tommy sat with Bear in his room. The dog was restless, pacing to the window every few minutes. "I know you want to show me," Tommy said, "but how do we get there?" Bear walked to Tommy's backpack and nosed it. Then he went to the door and looked back expectantly. "You want to go now?" But Mom and Dad, Bear, walked back to Tommy and gently took the boy's sleeve in his teeth, tugging him toward the door. His eyes held that profound intelligence that made him seem almost human. Tommy made a decision that would have horrified his parents if they'd known. He wrote a quick note. "Bear and I went to find the answer. Don't worry, we'll be safe." Then he slipped out the back door with the dog while his parents were on the phone in the kitchen. The walk to James's old house took 40 minutes. Bear led the way, his limp barely noticeable in his determination. They stayed on quiet streets, avoiding main roads. Several times Bear pulled Tommy behind bushes or cars, his instincts keeping them hidden from passing adults who might question a small boy walking alone with a large dog. When they reached the house, it was dark except for a porch light. A new SUV sat in the driveway. The new owners were home. Bear led Tommy not to the front door, but around the side of the house to a small shed that hadn't been there in James's time. The dog whined softly, pawing at the ground beside it. "They built over it?" Tommy whispered. Bear's tail drooped. Whatever James had hidden was now under a concrete foundation. But then Bear's ears perked up. He turned toward the back of the property where an old garden statue stood. A concrete angel that Tommy recognized from photos in Martha's collection. The new owners hadn't moved it. Bear went straight to the statue and began digging at its base. Tommy knelt beside him, using his small hands to help move the dirt. 3 inches down, Tommy's fingers hit something hard. Metal. It was a small box wrapped in plastic. Inside was a USB drive and another envelope, this one addressed, "For the court's eyes only." Tommy was about to open it when a flashlight beam hit them. "Hey! What are you doing?" A man stood on the back porch, the new homeowner. He looked more confused than angry, taking in the sight of a small boy and a German shepherd digging by his garden statue. "I'm sorry," Tommy said, his voice steady despite his fear. "We had to find something that belonged to Bear's first owner, the man who used to live here." The homeowner approached slowly. Bear positioned himself between Tommy and the man, not aggressive, but protective. "You mean Mr. Mitchell?" the man asked. "We bought this place from his estate." Tommy nodded. "He left something for Bear. For us. It's really important." The man studied them for a moment. Then his expression softened. "You're the boy from the news. The one who saved this dog. Tommy nodded again. The man sighed. My daughter saw that story, cried for an hour, made us donate to the animal shelter. He looked at the box in Tommy's hands. Is that what you were looking for? Yes, sir. Is it valuable? Money or something? Tommy shook his head. It's just papers, but they'll help Bear stay with me. The man was quiet for a moment. Then he said, My daughter would never forgive me if I got in the way of that. You found what you needed? Yes, sir. Thank you. How did you get here? Where are your parents? Tommy looked down. I walked. They don't know I left. The man's eyebrows rose. That's quite a walk for a little guy. Come on, I'll drive you home. Your parents must be worried sick. They were. Sarah was on the phone with 911 when the SUV pulled up. David was in his car, about to start searching. Both parents rushed out as Tommy emerged from the vehicle. Tommy! Sarah swept him into her arms, tears streaming down her face. Don't you ever do that again? David shook the homeowner's hand, thanking him profusely while also trying to understand what had happened. Tommy handed his father the box. Bear knew where it was, he explained simply. Mr. Mitchell hid it for us to find. Inside, after the homeowner left and the police were called back to cancel the missing child report, they opened the envelope. David read it aloud. I, James Mitchell, being of sound mind and body, do hereby declare this to be a codicil to my last will and testament. Recent events have made it necessary to clarify certain provisions. My nephew, Victor Walker, is to receive nothing from my estate. The document he possesses promising him inheritance was signed under duress when he threatened to have me declared incompetent and institutionalized. I kept evidence of this threat, which is contained in the accompanying USB drive. Furthermore, my service dog, Bear, is not property to be inherited. He is a living being with his own will and loyalty. I hereby release him from any obligation to my estate. He is free to choose his own family, and I trust his judgment in this matter completely. If Bear has bonded with another person or family, no claim of ownership based on his connection to me shall be considered valid. The dog's choice is final. This codicil was witnessed by my attorney, Robert Hensley, and my doctor, Patricia Nguyen, whose signatures appear below. A video recording of my statement is on the USB drive. Signed this day, January 15th, 2024, James Mitchell. The date was just 2 weeks before James's death. He knew, Sarah whispered. He knew he was dying and made sure Bear would be protected. David was already plugging the USB drive into his laptop. The video that played showed James, thin but alert, sitting at a kitchen table with 2 other people, presumably his lawyer and doctor. He repeated the contents of the letter clearly, then added, Bear is more than a service dog. He's a guardian. He knows things, senses things that we humans miss. If you're watching this, it means he's found someone who needs him, someone he's chosen to protect. Please don't separate them. Some bonds are sacred. The camera turned to show Bear, younger and healthier, watching James with those intelligent eyes. James's voice continued off screen. I've seen him watch a little boy at the park. Rose Chen's grandson. The boy who doesn't speak. Bear is drawn to him in a way I've never seen before. If something happens to me, I believe Bear will find his way to that child. And if he does, it's meant to be. The video ended. The room was silent except for Bear's breathing. The dog had positioned himself at Tommy's feet, his head resting on the boy's lap. This should be enough, David said. Any judge who sees this? He was interrupted by pounding on the front door. Through the window, they could see Victor Walker standing on their porch, and he wasn't alone. A uniformed animal control officer stood beside him. Open up, Victor shouted. I have a court order. David looked at the paper Victor was waving through the window. It looked official. How did he get that so fast? Sarah asked. He must have filed for an emergency order, David said grimly. Claimed the dog was dangerous or something. Bear stood, hackles raised, that familiar growl building in his throat. But Tommy placed a small hand on his head. It's okay, Bear. We have the truth now. David opened the door, keeping his body between Victor and his family. I have a court order for the immediate surrender of the dog, Victor said, triumph in his voice. The animal control officer looked uncomfortable, but held a catchpole. That order is based on false information. David said calmly. "We have James Mitchell's real will, a codicil that specifically states Bear is not part of the estate." Victor's face went pale, then red. "That's impossible. I would have been notified." "James hid it," Tommy said, stepping forward despite his parents' attempts to hold him back. "Because he knew you were mean. He knew you would try to hurt Bear just like you threatened to hurt him." "You lying little brat!" Victor stepped forward aggressively, and everything happened at once. Bear moved faster than should have been possible for a dog with a permanent limp. He placed himself between Victor and Tommy, his growl escalating to a bark that made everyone step back. The animal control officer raised his catch-pole, but Tommy's voice cut through the chaos. "Stop! Please! Bear's just protecting me." The officer hesitated. In that moment, Martha Mitchell's car pulled up, and she emerged with someone else, a man in a suit carrying a briefcase. "That's my attorney," Martha announced. "Mr. Hensley, the same lawyer who witnessed James's codicil." Robert Hensley was an older man, with silver hair and kind eyes behind wire-rimmed glasses. He walked up to the group with calm authority. "Officer, I'm afraid you are being asked to enforce an invalid order," he said. "I have here documentation that supersedes any claim Mr. Walker has made." He handed the officer a folder. "You'll find the authenticated codicil, the video evidence, and a sworn affidavit from Dr. Patricia Nguyen confirming James Mitchell was of sound mind when he signed these documents." The animal control officer read through the papers, relief visible on his face. He clearly hadn't wanted to take the dog. "Mr. Walker," he said, "based on this new information, I cannot enforce this order. You'll need to resolve this in court." Victor's face contorted with rage. "This is fraud. That will is fake. I'll prove it." "You're welcome to try," Hensley said mildly, "but you should know that the USB drive also contains recordings of your threats against James. Extortion is a serious crime, Mr. Walker." Victor went very still. His eyes darted between the lawyer, the officer, and Bear. Then, without another word, he turned and walked to his car. But before getting in, he looked back at Tommy. "This isn't over," he said quietly. After everyone left, the Chen family sat in their living room, exhausted from the emotional roller coaster. Bear lay between them, his head on Tommy's feet, finally relaxed. "Mr. Hensley says Victor probably won't pursue this," David said, "not with the evidence of extortion." "But what if he does?" Sarah asked. Tommy looked up from where he was stroking Bear's ears. "He won't." Bear scared him, not with teeth or growling, but with truth. Victor knows Bear remembers everything, all the mean things he did. It sounded fanciful, but they were learning not to dismiss Tommy's insights about Bear. That night, Tommy had another dream, but this one was different. Instead of his grandmother and James, he saw Bear, but not as he was now. This Bear was younger, standing in a military camp surrounded by soldiers, and beside him was another dog, nearly identical. "That's Scout," James's voice said, though he wasn't visible in the dream. "Bear's brother. They were trained together, but Scout came to me first. When Scout died, Bear knew to find me, just like Bear knew to find you." Tommy woke to find Bear watching him, those amber eyes reflecting the moonlight from the window. "You've done this before," Tommy whispered, "finding people who need you." Bear's tail thumped softly. The next few weeks passed peacefully. Victor Walker disappeared, apparently deciding not to challenge the will after all. The Chen family settled into a routine that revolved around Bear's needs and Tommy's school schedule. The dog accompanied Tommy to school each morning, waiting patiently outside until dismissal. The principal had made an exception, recognizing Bear's importance to Tommy's emotional well-being, but Bear's age was beginning to show. His limp was more pronounced in cold weather. He slept more during the day. Gray had begun to appear around his muzzle. "He's not a young dog, Doctor," Park said during a checkup. "I'd estimate he's about 9 or 10. Large breeds like German Shepherds typically live 12 to 14 years. Tommy heard this with the solemn acceptance that had become his trademark. "He'll stay as long as he needs to," he said simply. Dr. Park smiled at the boy's faith. "He's in good health for his age. The love and care you're giving him has added years to his life, I'm sure." But Bear's work wasn't done yet. It started with small things. Bear would suddenly alert during their walks, pulling Tommy away from certain people or places. Once, he prevented Tommy from crossing a street just seconds before a car ran a red light. Another time, he growled at a friendly-looking man who approached Tommy at the park, causing the man to quickly leave. They later learned he was a registered sex offender who wasn't supposed to be near playgrounds. "It's like he can sense danger before it happens," Sarah told David one evening. "Or bad intentions," David added, remembering how Bear had reacted to Victor before they even knew who he was. But Bear's most important save was yet to come. It was a Thursday afternoon in November. Tommy had been invited to his first ever birthday party. A classmate named Miguel, whose mother had been touched by Tommy and Bear's story. Sarah was thrilled that Tommy was finally making friends. The party was at an indoor play center, one of those places with climbing structures, ball pits, and arcade games. Parents dropped their kids off, planning to return in 2 hours. Sarah stayed, sitting with other mothers in the viewing area. Bear, of course, had accompanied them. He lay at Sarah's feet, apparently sleeping, but with one eye occasionally opening to check on Tommy. Everything was normal until Bear suddenly stood, his entire body rigid. He was staring at the play structure where Tommy and several other children were climbing. Sarah followed his gaze but saw nothing unusual. "What is it, Bear?" The dog whined, then barked, sharp and urgent. Other parents looked over in concern. "Is he okay?" one mother asked. Before Sarah could answer, Bear was moving. Despite his age and limp, he ran toward the play structure, barking continuously. He reached the base just as a terrible creaking sound filled the air. One of the main support beams of the structure, weakened by years of use and poor maintenance, was giving way. "Get the kids out!" Sarah screamed, understanding immediately. Parents rushed forward, but Bear was already there. He bounded up the structure's entrance, something a dog his size shouldn't have been able to do. Tommy was at the highest level with 3 other children, including Miguel. The structure swayed. Children screamed. Bear reached Tommy and immediately grabbed his shirt with his teeth, pulling him toward the slide, but Tommy resisted. "Miguel's stuck!" he cried. Indeed, the birthday boy's foot had gotten wedged between 2 panels that had shifted with the structure's movement. Bear released Tommy and went to Miguel, using his teeth to grip the boy's shoe. With a strength born of desperation, he pulled until the shoe came off, freeing Miguel's foot. Then he herded both boys toward the slide. "Go!" Tommy shouted to the other children. "Bear says go now!" They slid down just as the structure gave a final, ominous crack. Bear pushed the last child, a girl named Emma, onto the slide, then jumped. It was a 12-foot drop for the dog. He landed hard, his bad leg buckling. But he immediately got up, continuing to bark and herd children away from the structure. The play structure collapsed 30 seconds later, crushing the exact spot where the children had been playing. The silence that followed was deafening. Then Miguel's mother began to sob, clutching her son. Other parents grabbed their children, and everyone stared at Bear, who stood panting heavily, his leg held at an awkward angle but his eyes still alert, still watching for danger. "He saved them," someone whispered. "That dog saved all of them." The story made national news. Hero dog saves children from collapsed play structure. Bear's photo was everywhere, noble and tired, gray around his muzzle, but with eyes that still held that remarkable intelligence. The play center's owners, facing massive lawsuits for negligence, tried to claim the collapse was unforeseeable, but security footage showed Bear alerting a full minute before any visible signs of failure. Experts who reviewed the footage were baffled. The dog recognized structural failure before it was apparent, one engineer said on the news. "I don't know how that's possible." Tommy, interviewed with his parents' permission, had a simple answer. Bear knows things. He was trained to protect people, and he never stops watching for danger. The attention brought unexpected benefits. A pet food company offered to provide Bear's food for life. A veterinary chain offered free medical care. Someone started a college fund for Tommy that quickly grew to $50,000, but it also brought unwanted attention. The letter arrived on a Tuesday, mixed in with the fan mail they'd been receiving. This one was different. No return address, handwritten in block letters. "The dog knows too much. Some secrets should stay buried. Stop looking, or you'll regret it." David wanted to dismiss it as a crank letter, but Bear's reaction said otherwise. The dog sniffed the envelope once and immediately began growling, his hackles raised. "He recognizes the scent," Tommy said with certainty. "Someone bad touched this." They called Detective Morrison, who took the threat seriously. After everything that's happened, we can't be too careful. Is there anything else from James Mitchell's past that might be relevant? Martha, when consulted, mentioned something she'd forgotten. James had another USB drive. He told me it contained information about military contractors selling defective equipment. People died because of it. He said he'd hidden it somewhere only Bear would know. But we found the USB about the will, Sarah said. That was different, Martha said. This one was about the military scandal. James said it was his insurance policy. If anything happened to him, Bear would know where to find it. That night, Tommy dreamed again. This time, James Mitchell stood in what looked like a cemetery, military headstones stretching in perfect rows. Some fought the enemy in front of them, James said. Others fought the enemy, behind them, the ones wearing the same uniform but selling out their brothers for money. Where is it? Tommy asked. The evidence? James knelt and placed his hand on a headstone. The name was worn away, but Tommy could see numbers. 1968 to 1969. Bear knows, James said. When the time comes, he'll show you. But be careful, son. Some enemies don't wear uniforms anymore. They wear suits and smiles. Tommy woke to find Bear standing at his window, staring out into the darkness. Following the dog's gaze, Tommy saw a van parked across the street. It hadn't been there when he went to bed. Dad, Tommy called softly. David came quickly, saw the van, and immediately called 911. But by the time police arrived, the van was gone. Only tire tracks in the dew proved it had been there at all. The next morning brought a visit from someone unexpected. Colonel Patricia Hayes, dressed in full military uniform. I served with James Mitchell, she explained. I heard about the threats you've received. She sat very straight on their couch, her eyes moving between Tommy and Bear. The dog watched her calmly, his tail giving a single wag of recognition. You know Bear, Tommy said. It wasn't a question. I knew his predecessor, Scout. And I was there when Bear was trained. She paused. These dogs were part of a special program. They were trained not just for emotional support, but for intelligence work. Intelligence work? David asked. During operations, they could be sent into buildings to assess threats. But more importantly, they were trained to remember faces, scents, locations. Bear has a mental map of every place James considered important. Including where he hid evidence? Sarah asked. Colonel Hayes nodded. James contacted me 6 months before he died. Said he had proof that several high-ranking officers were involved in the contractor scandal, people who are now in positions of significant power. He was going to testify, but then... His heart attack, David finished. Yes, very convenient timing. Her tone suggested she didn't believe it was natural. Tommy had been quiet, but now he spoke up. Bear knows who hurt Mr. Mitchell. Everyone turned to look at him. That's why Bear's been watching for them, Tommy continued. He can smell them getting closer. Colonel Hayes leaned forward. Tommy, has Bear shown any unusual behavior lately, beyond the threats? Tommy thought about it. He keeps wanting to go to the cemetery, the one where soldiers are buried, but Mom and Dad say it's too far to walk. Riverside National Cemetery? Colonel Hayes asked. Tommy nodded. The colonel stood. I think we need to visit that cemetery, with Bear. They went that afternoon, the Chen family, Colonel Hayes, and Detective Morrison. Bear sat in the back of the car, his body tense with purpose. At the cemetery, Bear immediately took the lead. He moved between the headstones with clear intention, following a path only he knew. They walked for 10 minutes before Bear stopped at a specific grave. The headstone read, Private Michael Chen, 1948 to 1969, beloved son and brother. Sarah gasped. Chen, that's your maiden name, David finished. Sarah knelt by the stone, her fingers tracing the letters. This could be a relative. My father's cousin went to Vietnam. He never came back. Bear began digging at the base of the headstone, not frantically, but with careful purpose. Colonel Hayes stopped him gently. We need permission to dig here, she said. But I think I know what James did. These older headstones have hollow bases, designed to hold memorial items. She made a phone call. Within an hour, they had permission from the cemetery director, who was a veteran himself and understood the importance of their search. Using proper tools, they carefully exposed the base of the headstone. There was indeed a hollow space, and inside, wrapped in waterproof material, was another USB drive and a notebook. The notebook was in James's handwriting, documenting everything: names, dates, amounts of money, defective equipment that caused deaths. The USB contained photos, recordings, and digital copies of invoices. "This is enough to bring down a dozen people," Detective Morrison said, scrolling through the files. "But it also explains the threats. These people have a lot to lose." Colonel Hayes took charge of the evidence, promising it would go directly to military prosecutors. James tried to do this the right way and was stopped, but his legacy, through Bear, will see justice done. As they prepared to leave the cemetery, Tommy noticed Bear had wandered to another section. They found him sitting beside a newer headstone, one with fresh flowers. Sergeant James Mitchell, 1947 to 2024, forever faithful. Tommy hadn't known James was buried here. Neither had his parents, but Bear had known. The dog lay down beside the stone, his head on his paws, keeping watch as he must have wanted to do months ago. "He's saying goodbye properly this time," Tommy said softly. They gave Bear all the time he needed. When he finally stood, there was something different about him, a peace that hadn't been there before. His mission, James's mission, was complete. The drive home was quiet, each person lost in thought. But as they pulled into their driveway, Bear suddenly became agitated again. He barked sharply, pawing at the car door. David saw it first. Their front door was open. Not forced, but unlocked and ajar. "Stay in the car," he told his family, pulling out his phone to call 911. But Bear was already out. Having somehow managed to open the car door, he raced toward the house, ignoring David's calls to stop. They heard barking, then a crash, then silence. "Bear!" Tommy screamed, trying to get out of the car. Sarah held him back. Police arrived within minutes, entering the house carefully. They emerged soon after with a man in handcuffs, not Victor Walker or anyone they recognized. He was young, clean-cut, wearing an expensive suit now, torn and dirty. "Corporate lawyer," Detective Morrison explained later, "hired by one of the people in James's files. He was looking for any remaining evidence." "Where's Bear?" Tommy asked urgently. They found him in Tommy's room, standing guard over the boy's bed. There was blood on his muzzle, not his own, and his eyes held that fierce, protective light. "He cornered the intruder in here," the officer explained. "Wouldn't let him move until we arrived." The lawyer needed 15 stitches, but refused to press charges, probably because he'd been caught breaking and entering. He also refused to say who hired him, but Colonel Hayes said it didn't matter. "We have enough evidence. The investigation is already underway. Multiple arrests are expected." That night, as the family tried to process everything that had happened, Tommy sat with Bear in the backyard under the stars. The dog was exhausted, his age showing more than ever. The day's events had taken a toll. "You did it, Bear," Tommy said softly. "You finished Mr. Mitchell's work. You kept us safe. You can rest now." Bear looked at him with those wise amber eyes, then did something he'd never done before. He licked Tommy's face, then lay down with his head in the boy's lap. Not beside him, not near him, but actually resting on him. Complete trust. Complete love. Sarah found them there an hour later, both asleep. She covered them with a blanket and let them stay, somehow knowing this moment was important. The next morning, Bear struggled to stand. His breathing was labored. Dr. Park came immediately. "His heart," she said gently after examining him. "It's been working too hard for too long. All that protecting, all that vigilance, it's taken its toll." "Can you help him?" Tommy asked, though something in his voice suggested he already knew the answer. "I can make him comfortable, Doctor," Park said. "But Tommy, Bear is tired. He's been holding on for a purpose, now that it's complete. She didn't need to finish. They all understood. They made Bear as comfortable as possible, surrounding him with soft blankets and familiar toys. Tommy stayed by his side, reading from the old picture book that had belonged to his grandmother. Friends came to say goodbye. Martha Mitchell, who brought photos of James for Bear to smell one last time. Colonel Hayes, who saluted the old soldier. Miguel and his mother, who credited Bear with saving Miguel's life. Even the homeowner, who'd driven Tommy home that night months ago, his daughter clutching a drawing she'd made of Bear. As the sun set, painting the sky in shades of gold and pink, Bear's breathing grew shallower. Tommy held his head gently, whispering words only the dog could hear. "Grandma's waiting for you," Tommy said. "And Mr. Mitchell. They want to thank you for taking care of me, for teaching me to be brave, for showing me how to use my voice." Bear's tail thumped weakly one last time. His eyes, still bright with that remarkable intelligence, found Tommy's face, and in them Tommy saw everything: love, pride, peace, and promise. "I'll be okay," Tommy whispered. "You taught me how, and someday, when I'm old and gray like you, we'll see each other again. You and me and Grandma and Mr. Mitchell. We'll all sit together in the sunshine." Bear's eyes slowly closed, his breathing gentled, then stilled. The great heart that had protected so many finally rested. The silence that followed was profound, not empty but full, of memories, gratitude, and love that transcended the physical world. They buried Bear beneath the oak tree in their backyard, next to the small memorial for James and Rose. Tommy placed Bear's collar in the grave, along with the picture book and a photo of their family together. "He was never just a dog," Tommy said at the small ceremony they held. "He was a guardian, a teacher, a bridge between hearts. He showed me that love doesn't end with death. It just changes shape." Martha brought a small headstone she'd made. It read, "Bear, faithful guardian, forever loved." As they stood together in the fading light, a wind chime on the porch began to sing despite the still air. Tommy smiled through his tears. "He's saying he's okay," the boy said, with the certainty that had marked his entire relationship with Bear. 2 weeks later, a package arrived with no return address. Inside was a medal, a purple heart, and a note. This belonged to James Mitchell. He would want the boy to have it, for courage beyond his years, for loyalty beyond measure, for love beyond understanding. A grateful nation. Tommy held the medal up to the light, seeing his reflection in its surface. But he also saw something else, the reflection of who he'd become because of a dog who'd collapsed on their doorstep during a storm. "We should go to the shelter," Tommy announced at dinner that night. His parents looked at him in surprise. They'd been careful not to mention other dogs, thinking it was too soon. "Are you sure?" Sarah asked gently. Tommy nodded. "Bear taught me something. Love isn't meant to be kept. It's meant to be shared. There's another dog out there who needs us, and we need them." David and Sarah exchanged glances, seeing their son's wisdom and strength. "Not to replace Bear," Tommy continued. "Nothing could do that, but to honor him, to continue what he started." The next Saturday they visited the shelter. Tommy walked slowly through the rows of kennels, looking at each dog carefully. Some barked excitedly, others cowered in corners. But Tommy kept walking until he reached the last kennel. Inside was a small mixed-breed puppy, maybe 3 months old, with one ear that stood up and one that flopped down. She wasn't beautiful or impressive. She was skinny and scared, pressed against the back wall. But when Tommy knelt by the kennel, she crept forward. Their eyes met, and Tommy saw something familiar. Not Bear's wisdom or strength, but something else. Potential. The capacity to love and be loved. The beginning of another story. "This one," Tommy said simply. "Are you sure?" the shelter worker asked. "She's very timid, probably abused. She'll need a lot of work." Tommy smiled, and for a moment, his parents saw Bear's influence in that smile. Patient, knowing, determined. "I know about scared creatures who need love," Tommy said. "Bear taught me. They're the ones who love the strongest once they learn they're safe." They brought the puppy home that day. Tommy named her Hope. That night, Tommy sat in his room with Hope curled in his lap, looking at the photos covering his wall. Bear in the tunnel, Bear at the vet, Bear protecting him from danger. Bear in his final days, gray and tired, but still watching over his boy. "I'll teach her everything you taught me," Tommy promised the photos, about bravery and loyalty and love, about protecting those who need it, about using our voices when it matters. Hope looked up at him with trusting eyes, and Tommy saw the future stretching ahead. Not a replacement of what was, but a continuation of love's endless story. Outside, the oak tree stood sentinel over Bear's grave, its branches reaching toward stars that seemed unusually bright. And somewhere, in whatever place faithful hearts go to rest, a German shepherd named Bear lay peaceful at last, his duty complete, his boy safe, his legacy living on in every act of courage and compassion that followed. 5 years passed. Tommy, now 10, stood before a classroom giving a presentation about service dogs. Hope, now full-grown and certified as a therapy dog, sat beside him. On the screen behind them was a photo of Bear. "Some dogs are more than pets," Tommy said, his voice clear and strong. "They're teachers. They show us that love doesn't need words, that loyalty doesn't need rewards, that courage isn't about not being scared. It's about protecting others despite your fear." He clicked to the next slide, showing statistics about military service dogs. "My dog Bear served his country through his handler, Sergeant James Mitchell, but his greatest service came after his handler died. He found me when I couldn't speak, when grief had stolen my voice. He protected my family from dangers we didn't even know existed. He saved children from a collapsing building. He helped expose corruption that had caused soldiers' deaths." The classroom was silent, even the typically restless students captivated. "But most importantly," Tommy continued, "he taught me that connections between souls don't end, they transform. Every dog I train now, every child I help find their voice, every act of protection and love, it all carries Bear's spirit forward." His teacher, Mrs. Rodriguez, wiped away a tear. She'd known Tommy since kindergarten, remembered the silent boy who'd found his voice through a dog's love. After the presentation, a small girl approached Tommy. She hadn't spoken since her father's death in Afghanistan 6 months ago. Her mother had brought her to and hear Tommy speak, hoping for a miracle. The girl looked at Hope, then at the photo of Bear still on the screen. She opened her mouth, and for the first time in half a year, words emerged. Can dogs really hear our hearts?" Tommy knelt to her level, Hope automatically moving to the girl's side, offering her head for petting. "Yes," Tommy said simply. "They hear what we can't say. They know what we need before we do, and sometimes, if we're very lucky, they find us exactly when we need them most." The girl buried her face in Hope's fur and began to cry, not the silent tears she'd shed for months, but healing sobs that released the grief she'd been holding. Her mother wept too, reaching for her daughter. Tommy stood back, watching Hope do what Bear had taught her, to be present, patient, and full of unconditional love. He thought of the chain that connected them all, Rose and James in Vietnam, their letters across an ocean, Bear and Scout, brothers in service, James and Bear, healing each other, Bear finding Tommy, and now Hope, carrying forward the legacy. That night, Tommy visited Bear's grave, as he did every week. The oak tree had grown tall and strong, its roots deep, its branches wide. He placed a small toy, one Hope had outgrown, at the base of the headstone. "We helped another one today, Bear," he said softly. "A girl who lost her voice like I did. Hope knew just what to do, because you taught us both." The wind chimed through the branches, and for just a moment, Tommy could swear he heard a familiar bark in the distance, approving, proud, eternal. He smiled, knowing that some loves transcend death, some bonds outlast bodies, and some dogs never really leave us. They just wait, patient and faithful, until we meet again. As Tommy walked back to the house, where Hope waited by the window, her tail wagging at his return, he understood the greatest truth Bear had taught him. Love doesn't end. It multiplies. It spreads from heart to heart, from soul to soul, creating an endless chain of connection and compassion. And somewhere, in dreams and memories and the space between heartbeats, a German shepherd named Bear continued his watch, not just over one boy, but over all the lives he'd touched and all the love he'd set in motion. The story that began with a dog collapsing in a playground tunnel had become something larger, a testament to the power of connection, the strength of love, and the miracles that happen when broken hearts find each other in the storm. Bear's mission was complete, but his legacy would live forever in every child who found their voice, every dog who found their purpose, and every heart that learned to love without limits. Because that's what guardian angels do. They teach us to be guardians for each other, long after they've earned their wings. Don't forget to like, share, and subscribe to hear more incredible stories of the unbreakable bonds between humans and animals. Comment below and tell us where you're watching from, and if you've ever experienced a connection with an animal that changed your life. Remember, somewhere out there, a soul is waiting to find you, just like Bear found Tommy.